You can always gauge who really respects you and loves you and cherishes you by how they honor your boundaries, how they show up for you in that way. That if I'm saying don't call me before 11 a.m. and you're steady ringing off my phone at 9 a.m., you don't really care about me or my well-being. You can tell how people treat you, love you, how they believe in you, whatever, by how they honor your boundaries. Boundaries are the things, right, that protects the treasure on the inside.
Here we grow again. Our hearts on the mend. What I want is what I want. Soft spaces.
Hey there, and welcome to Softspaces Podcast, where I get to share a little bit of me to connect with a little bit of you so that we can build a community of wholeness together where we thrive in every area of our lives. My name's Yolanda Lewis, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm also super glad about our guests. As you can see, we're doing things a little bit different today. And the woman that I have here, let me just tell y'all, she is amazing. She's super down to earth. She is super easy to talk to. She's a mindfulness coach, a therapist, a restorer of peace, and she helps people meet or re-meet the very best version of themselves. And her name is Stephanie Jones. Welcome, Stephanie. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me in this soft space. I love it. I appreciate the invite and cannot wait to dive into our conversation.
Yes. I couldn't. You were the total perfect guest for this conversation. And just so y'all know, today we're talking about unmuted boundaries in
Mm.
sisterly relationships. And the reason the topic is unmuted and boundaries all like in one, because that's kind of like an oxymoron. They kind of don't go together in a simple form. But the reason it's so important is because a lot of times in relational dynamics, you can feel muted, where you feel like you can't be yourself, where you feel like you can't say the things that are on your heart because it's not a soft space, or because you think the person's not open, or for whatever the reason, because they can be many, you can feel muted. And so we want to take those limits off in this conversation and unmute and find ways, and Stephanie's going to share all these things, but find ways where you can use tools that help you to be present as your current, most vulnerable, authentic self in your sisterly relationships so that you both can thrive in your growth. I'll pause right there to just give you space if you want to just say a little something, because that right there already is heavy.
It's heavy. And anytime we talk about boundaries, it's heavy because we're a society, no matter where you are in the world, we do not emphasize the need for boundaries, be it at home, in our relationships, at church, on our jobs, anywhere we are, we do not emphasize boundaries. And we really look at people sideways when they want to try to enforce boundaries. Like, who are you? Who do you think you are? Like, this is the way we've always been doing it. So we're talking about the unmuted boundary, meaning that we are releasing the muzzle and we're taking off the binds that were on us so that we can protect ourselves. See, boundaries is one of my favorite things to talk about. Boundaries, unless you've had to put your boundaries up. And depending on the family you were raised in, where you lived, where you went to school, church, here, there, ballet, anywhere, you had to have a certain amount of boundaries or you're going to perish. It's to our detriment that we don't have boundaries. So I'm like, I just was nodding my head with what you were saying. Like, yes to all that. Take off the limits of the boundaries, unmute the boundaries, because boundaries with restrictions aren't boundaries at all. It's another restriction. It doesn't make sense.
Right. And that's so key. I love what you said, because the boundaries are there to protect you. They protect
Yes.
you. And I think that we live in a culture where we look to heal, which is good, but we don't look to protect ourselves.
You
We
know?
look to protect our children. We look to protect what's important to us. We look to protect our marriage. We look to protect
Yeah,
our, all these things, but not ourselves.
it's true.
Not ourselves. So I love that. And it brings me to our first question. Why are boundaries so important in sisterly slash sibling relationships? And I say both because there's so much talk about sis, this and that and sit
Yeah,
and it's really not sis because there's not standards set up to hold, right? There's no foundation to hold that sisterhood. So you got
true.
sisterhood, and then that same dynamic follows up in our real blood sister relationship to
True.
where you could grow up in the same house and have completely different life experiences. And then because you think you know each other, you handle each other without boundaries. That's not
Correct.
safe for anybody. There's no soft spaces anywhere in that dynamic. So why are they, so important? Why do boundaries matter? And how can we use them to help us grow closer to each other in that sisterhood dynamic without creating distance, like the opposite of it?
Yeah, that's such a good first question because it's like we tend to remove our boundaries the closer we are to people. That if you're my blood sister, DNA has connected us and we have the same blood running through our veins, same mom, same dad, or same mom, but different dad, whoever, however we're connected, we tend to lower and drop our boundaries because it's out of love. But boundaries are love. And those who respect our boundaries show us that they love us. You can always gauge who really respects you and loves you and cherishes you by how they honor your boundaries, how they show up for you in that way. That if I'm saying don't call me before 11 a.m. and you're steady ringing off my phone at 9 a.m., you don't really care about me or my well being. And it's this honest speech that I've had to adopt where I am. That this speech is like, I cannot sugarcoat this. That you can tell how people treat you, love you, how they believe in you, whatever, by how they honor your boundaries. Boundaries are the things, right, that protects the treasure on the inside. So it's super important that we are overemphasizing it in our family relations and those who say sis, 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 because people will use our lack of boundaries and our openness and vulnerability to enter into spaces that they shouldn't be and to use us and to use up all of our energy and to wring us dry. Like they will drain us and take us.
Girl,
Yolanda, they'll
girl,
drain us and they'll and then they'll
girl.
say, "Oh, you're my sis. You're my bro."
Right,
Pardon? I am?
right.
Because there's certain
Yeah.
things you shouldn't do to your sis or your bro. There's certain ways you shouldn't act and behave. There's certain things you should respect about me. So we need it more than ever. And it's really important to be aware, right? That's another kind of version of the answer. To be aware when it's needed. That are you feeling uncomfortable in these spaces with your biological siblings or those of you who have taken on as your chosen family, but they are running over you. Are you Mrs. Doormat or Mr. Doormat? Should that be your name? Like, should you change your ID card to that? Because there's no possible way. You know what I mean? There's no possible way that you are able to do
Yeah.
this and it's like, oh wait, what? No, it's
Yeah.
wrong.
I love it. And what it makes me think of, and I laugh because you were so on point. I told y'all she is the realest but the truthfulest too. That's not a word, but we're gonna put it
It
right
is
in there.
now. It
And
is now.
so, but it's a new word now. But what I love and what came to mind as you were talking was how much trouble people have with the idea of being honest and being mean, or being honest and feeling guilty about their truth. And I think about that even for myself, right? Like I used to feel like I was being more supportive if I took it. And that was connected to some other trauma of I have background of being sexually molested. And so in that space, that mindset is you take to survive,
Yeah.
because that's the only way to get through it is you just like you endure whatever it is. So that mindset went with me, even though the experience was long gone and
Yes.
the various parts of the trauma had been healed. The mindset of feeling guilty for having a truth, because even in that same dynamic of being molested, I couldn't speak up for
No.
all the reasons, right? I couldn't speak up and say my truth. I
Mm.
got used to not speaking up and not saying my truth. So fast
Yes.
forward into sis and sisterhood and you my sister and all of this and that. I just took it. I just took it because I felt bad
Yeah.
about speaking my truth.
Huh.
So what are some other common well, go ahead. Speak on something and then
No,
I'll ask the next question.
we feel guilty about speaking our truth. And we're not talking about the truth. Like everyone has their own version of truth. I mean, we mean the actual truth, not the truth that we have deluded ourselves to believe. Like, I want to make that distinction clear.
Right.
The truth that we know to be
Right.
true. These things are, I hold evident. Let me start talking like the Constitution, right? These things are true.
Right.
These are real, true things.
Right.
And we feel so much shame and we feel so much guilt and we feel so much burdened down that we are like quieting our own truth and we're letting people tell our narrative. See, there's something called the dominant and the
Mm,
subjugated narrative. When we talk about narrative therapy and all that, right?
mm,
You talk about the
mhm,
dominant one, it might not be the truth. It might be just the one that you allowed people to
mhm,
say. The subjugated one, the one that you've
mhm,
oppressed, that's the truth. And we have to let that rise up and not convince ourselves that someone else is going to tell my
mhm,
story. That's a boundary we have to put up. And it's a space we
mhm.
have to enter in with a lot
Ooh,
of confidence. So I'm like, yeah, the truth is the
mhm,
truth. And we have to speak up about it. We can't
mhm,
change it. It happened. But if we keep denying it, again, it's to
mm-mm.
our detriment. It's to our detriment.
It is. It is. So talk to me about some of the other common challenges that people have and sibling and sisters have in trying to navigate and set these or communicate these boundaries. We talked about guilt as one of them. And how do you overcome them?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different scenarios. So I'm thinking immediately about
Mhm,
parents who pit their children against each other. That can create
mhm,
division, that can create just a level of envy and hatred. And you'll begin to say things and do things to your siblings that you shouldn't be doing to your siblings. You begin to sabotage, you begin to speak negatively, all
mhm,
that. And then at a certain point, you have to say, I'm not going to allow you to treat me like this anymore. Like whatever happened when we were children, that happened. But I can't allow
mhm,
myself to be the doormat or the whipping post anymore. Or if a sibling did something,
mhm,
to a sibling like when they were children and it might have done something detrimental to them. I don't even mean like anything
mhm,
like physically abusive. I just mean like maybe you
mhm,
caused them harm in some way, you tripped them and they broke their leg. Like there are some siblings who will ride that
mhm,
out into adulthood and they will talk bad to you
mhm,
because they feel like you have to pay penance and over and over again. These are boundaries we have to set up. Like I know I did that, but you can't hold this over my head. That's not okay. Then we see the siblings who are the scapegoats, who everything just gets piled on them. That sibling has to then say, I cannot be this anymore. I must put a boundary up for my own safety, that these are the people that I grew up with. I love
mhm.
them. Those are just a few scenarios, right? Where we're talking about brother, sis. Someone's
Right,
always asking. Someone's always asking you
right.
for money. Someone's always asking you for resources, and there's nothing wrong with helping family. But if
Yep.
it's to our detriment,
Sure.
I have to throw that on everything. If it's to our detriment, it's great
Right.
to be helpful. And I say this all the time too. I want to give from my overflow. I can never give from my portion because my portion belongs to me. And if I start giving from my portion so much,
Mm,
then I'm going to deplete myself. These are boundaries we have to put up to the ones that we call brother and sister who have our same parents,
right,
but also the ones, again, we chose. It should not be to our detriment. And
right.
I want to say this too, and then I'm going to land this
Mm-mm.
plane. Especially in the faith, in the
Mhm,
household of faith, we feel that we're
mhm.
like Jesus the most when we just lay down and allow anyone to do anything to us.
Mm,
No, no, ma'am, no, sir. Because that's the same Messiah who went into the temple and turned over those tables and rushed those people out. He didn't just lay down and do anything and to say, oh, you can walk all over me. We preach the meek and mild Jesus, but we don't talk about the rebellious one who we need to be like and stopping injustice. So I want to say that too. Like, let's realign our
I
thoughts
love
on
it.
that. You know?
I love it. And I love that that's I think a real key of how you can overcome is using the measure of, is this to
Yes.
my detriment? That's the
Ugh.
measure. How you reframe that narrative by checking yourself and asking yourself the question before you respond. Before you respond, I got you. Before you respond, let's do it. Is this to my detriment? That's it. How many?
That's
Is
it.
this to my detriment?
It's
5
just
words. Is this to my detriment? And that's it even a thing. Like
detriment.
pause, hold up, hold up.
It's a stop
Is this
sign, a
to my
pause.
detriment?
Hold.
That's it. Hold up. And I think if we use that based on what you said, if you use that as the measure, then you can find yourself in a place where you're positioned to respond honestly. You're
Absolutely.
positioned to even set a boundary, right? Like you're putting it up
Absolutely.
in that moment. You're putting it right up by pausing because there's no rush to reply to anybody else's need. There's no rush.
There's
Their
no rush.
urgency
And
does not have to mean your
our
urgency,
crisis, and it's the truth. Unless we have a savior complex and we want to save
right?
everybody, and we want to be God
Right,
to everybody. Unless we have that complex,
right,
which a lot of siblings do, that
right.
you've taken care of your sibling for
Yes.
so long that you won't even let them
Mhm,
stumble their toe. You won't even let them get a little bang up. You won't
mhm,
even though these
mhm,
situations that we find ourselves in, this fire, this hot water builds our character. No, we won't allow our siblings to experience any level of hurt or pain or anything. Then we become the savior.
mhm,
Then we become in the way of God, and we become the idol. They don't need to pray. They don't need to ask
mhm.
for a miracle because they got staff. They got
Girl,
Yolanda.
you
Why?
better speak that thing. You better speak that thing. Let me help somebody right here by sharing a little piece of how I did that, right? Because this is a
Yeah,
soft space. So I can
soft
be
space.
vulnerable and we can be vulnerable. I want people to understand how that plays out in real time. In real time, how that plays out, like I shared with my story of being molested. I lived to make sure none of my siblings experienced what I experienced. I lived for that in terms of covering them, in terms of whatever they needed. I
Yeah.
lived to get in the way of God. I lived
Yep.
for it
Yep.
because I didn't want to see them go through any part of what I had to endure.
Right.
It's even with those sweetest intentions, I was in the way of God. Now I don't of course wish them to experience, bad, but my
Sure.
interception of anything, even if it didn't look like that, of
Right.
anything, my interception as the oldest and taking on that responsibility as the
Yep.
oldest was in the way of God. So
Absolutely.
I wanted someone to really understand how that plays out in real time. It doesn't matter what your intentions are because people are quick to be like, oh, that's not me. Oh, let me tap out. I'll listen. Like, let me fast forward
Sure.
because that part's not for me. No, it's for you. It's for you. It's for you. It's for you.
Absolutely. We're covering all bases. So we often do that.
All bases.
Whether we're watching a documentary about something with life or reading a self-help book or reading the scripture, that's not for me, that's for them. No, we're covering everybody. Where we're taking a moment to say,
Everybody.
I need to hold myself accountable and I need to see where I am
Mhm,
needing a boundary or I have my boundaries too
mhm,
low and this inside is
mhm.
being impacted. Like that is super important.
Right. Yeah. And to that point of my story of being the oldest child, talk about the family dynamics. We touched on it a little bit, and that's where I pulled from what you said, which
Yeah.
again I wanted to bring light to how it plays out in real time. But how do those unspoken family dynamics or the role that you are in your sibling line, how does that influence the way you approach setting up boundaries and how can we work to kind of break those patterns? And I want to give one more example too before you tee up. In
Sure.
my sibling line, I grew up the oldest, and I do have an older sister who I absolutely love and adore, but I grew up the oldest. And so with that, they treated me as second in command. And
Right.
I didn't want that responsive, like I was already, by the time I became an adult, it was like I already did the big sister thing. I don't necessarily want to hold that space for the rest of my life because matter of fact, I need you. And even though you're my younger sibling, you understand in a way other people can. And I want to tap into that. And I need you to feed me a little bit, not all the time, but in for this particular thing, I see you're strong there. I need your help. And so we had to find ways to break that pattern of can't talk to Londa because she's, and look, y'all can't call me Londa just for my family. But that's a boundary. Okay. But we had to break that, like, You can't talk to Londa because she's, second in command. Don't tell her, when I could have helped them, and
Mhm.
or they could have helped me. So
Correct.
again, I wanted to just give an example of real time of what that looks like, so no one excludes themselves from needing the gems that are in this dialogue. All right, go
Yeah.
ahead, sis.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, and we were talking about the places that we are in our family, right? I'm the youngest of five, so it's a whole different ball game, right? Being the youngest compared to the oldest.
Mhm,
And then people will baby you, they'll baby you. I'm 36, I'll be 37 next year. Like, people will baby you. And I'm
mhm.
like, wait, whoa, how old am I? I'm looking at my birth certificate, I'm looking at my ID. But it just happens, right? And you have to, even if
Yeah.
people in your family don't allow you to grow up, you have to show them that you're
Mhm.
grown. I don't mean being reckless and going to get a Harley and a tattoo. I mean
Right.
showing them in how
Right.
you act, how you behave, and saying, you know what, I got that. I'm all set. You don't have to do this, or you don't have to pre-plan this, or you don't have to give me all these instructions. Like, that's just, you have to you have to allow people grace because they've known you longer as the youngest than as an adult, and it's just a
Right.
reality. And
Yeah.
so you have to really train people how
Mhm.
to treat you. And depending on where you are in
Mm.
your family, right? We know that the middle children are always forgotten about. So they say. So they say. So they say. Right.
Right. So they say that's
So
the
they say.
narrative. Uh-huh.
That's the narrative. Anywho, you just have to see where you are placed in your family, and then how you
Mhm.
adjust your boundaries to what you need. That the boundaries for the oldest and the
Mhm.
boundaries for the youngest are going to be completely different for the boundaries for the middle children. It's just going to be because the oldest is trying to say, "Hey, I don't want all this responsibility," and that we can measure it out, and that
Mhm.
don't pile all this on me. While the youngest
Mhm.
is saying, "Hey, let me grow up, get
Right.
me out of the baby box that you put me in." So there
Right.
are different
Right.
boundaries depending on where you're placed.
Mhm.
And then for the older
Mhm.
siblings the whole family babies, but for the older siblings to always check on, the younger ones, and the younger ones always checking on the oldest ones because it's easy to
Mhm.
forget. It's easy to be self-absorbed,
Mhm.
especially as the youngest. It's all about
Mhm.
me, 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 but that's
Mhm.
not who I am anyway. But
Mhm.
it's easy to
Right.
fall into that. So it's important for me to check on
For
my older
sure.
for me to check on my siblings because you want to make sure that everybody's
Right.
working together.
Mhm. and
Yeah,
and be able to hold that soft space for them, be
correct.
able to hold literally a soft space where if they are like, when you reach out and they do need you, you're open to that, to
You're
the best
open.
of your ability.
Correct. Correct.
I love it. So with those siblings who might feel a little bit of guilt or fear with setting boundaries, what are some strategies that they can use to set them in a way that still feels like love and still feels like respect?
I think that's such a good question because when you have to set up a boundary with those who you're closest with, you really don't want to do it. You don't want to say anything. You just want to let it pass. You don't want to cause any drama, any wahala. You don't want to cause any issues, right? What I have found to be best for me and recommended for others, and I've seen it work, do a role play with a trusted group of people. Have people stand in for you. That if I need to talk to my sister and my brother, that I have maybe two females, two men. It doesn't matter. Like, you just have the people as a representative, and you start the flow of the conversation. The goal is to prepare your mouth and your mind and your body to already have the conversation. Usually, when you have it ahead of time and you're just saying it, and then they're able to answer back and do all this, you're literally training yourself to have the conversation. So when it's time to have it, you can just start having it. And you can do that as many times as you want to. You can even write out the script. You can even write down what you want to say to make sure that all your points are taken. Look at yourself in the mirror and have the conversation as if you were talking to the person that you need to set the boundary with. Like, the goal is to prepare your mouth, your mind, and your body to have the conversation. You really only do that by rehearsing it. Pretend you're an actor or an actress and you're rehearsing lines so that when the big show comes, the curtains open, your mind and your mouth are like, oh, I've had this conversation before. Let me just get this out. It's always going to be awkward, sis. There's always going to be a level of anxiety there, and that's okay. We don't have to run from anxiety. We know it's there. It's how you manage it. You know it's going to be a time of anxiety, and that's all right. You can take your deep breaths. We'll get into that. You know you're going to feel awkward and weird. It's okay. You keep pushing. You acknowledge your feelings and you keep pushing forward to it.
I love that. I love that. And for us in soft space land, that
Yes.
is the key, is to acknowledge those emotions. We're human. That is a part of our human experience to
Yes.
have emotion. The line is where we talked about earlier. Is it to my detriment, right? Am I
Mm,
letting my emotions run over me to where it is to my detriment? And that is the space where you reach out for more help. That is the space where you reach out to get the support that you need in terms of tools or a
yeah.
listening ear or therapy or coaching. That is where you solicit that assistance. So, that being said, I've so enjoyed our conversation, like for real. And I thank you so much for being a part of it and really leading our discussion and our mindset on how to unmute our voices when it
Mm,
comes to setting those necessary boundaries in
yes.
relationships that are most important to us, that sisterhood and that sibling relationship. So thank you. Where can people keep in touch, get in touch, experience more of what you offer? How does that happen?
Yeah, so I am Lilac Calandra everywhere. I'm Lilac Calandra on Facebook. That's lilac like the color. Calandra, Calandra, which is my middle name. So I'm that everywhere. I'm that on Instagram. It's lilac underscore Calandra. I'm on TikTok. I'm on all the things. YouTube, same name. So you can find me there. And I have some things being released. Re upping and redoing my website and releasing some projects to really help, because it's one thing to hear it, but I want people to be able to hear it all the time. And you can press play and pause when you need it. So I'm just pushing myself to release what I need to release.
And y'all will love it. Her voice, like, you just got to hear her voice. Her
Thank you
voice
very
is
much.
so like melodic, like songbird, like it's
Thank you.
all the things. It will really bring you into the place. So I haven't heard it yet, of course, but I vouch for it already because I've heard her voice. I know her spirit and her intention and her heart, and I'm so thankful that I get to share that with y'all, and you will
Mm,
love it. So make sure that you explore all the links below because her information is there. And we're so grateful to be able to share you. Thank you so much for coming on. Listen, before we close out our episode, we do this religiously, and that is breathe. And as we enter into this space of breathing, I want you to consider all of what we discussed in our episode today. It may have brought up some of your own emotions about
mm,
your own boundaries that are not unmuted because they're muted right now. You might be in a space where you feel like the cat got your tongue. And
mm,
in your relationships and your hurt, you're not able to really thrive the way you want to or connect the way you want to in the relationships that you have. Use this opportunity to breathe through it and consider what you could actively practice engaging in next so that you can have boundaries that are unmuted and true to your truest self. So, as we enter into this space, we're going to do two breaths and we're going to do a deep inhale. We're going to then hold it and bring in one more breath, and then we're going to release together. And as you release and breathe, you might find that your body wants to make a sound, and that's okay. Let it. Let yourself exhaust whatever is inside of you. You may even find yourself in a space where you feel like crying. Don't
mm,
hold back. Let it. Let yourself feel whatever emotions are trying to pass through in this moment as you are breathing and as you are connecting with a new mindset that has unmuted boundaries. I want you to embrace this moment. I want you to be encouraged to be strengthened to be able to create those boundaries you need to create in your life. And
mm.
if you feel like you need to breathe more afterward, done our two breaths, please continue to do so. And lastly, if you're driving, please do not close your eyes. Please do not close your eyes. Your safety is most important to this moment. So, again, welcome to the soft space. Let's begin. A deep breath in, one more breath, and release. Deep breath in. One more breath. And release. I want to thank you for being a part of this episode. I pray that your week is blessed. I thank you again for watching. Take care and God bless.